Hello again, it's me. I have some stuff to say related to myself and the channel, but if you're just here for the review, then there's no need to care and you can go ahead and skip to the timestamp on the screen. Alright, time's up. So I started this whole YouTube thing, the It's Banana Blitz channel, a little over a year ago, and with my first video being a review of Gunfire Reborn.
Gunfire Reborn is a first-person action roguelike where you crawl around a semi-linear dungeon shooting whatever moves.
That was my first video, and it was pretty primitive compared to what I think I can do now. During my several-month break, I've done a few things. I splurged and got myself a brand new mic. I went in and put sound panels in my room, which was an absolute pain to put up. I also won first place at a local film festival in the commercial category, which I'm immensely proud of, even though it was kind of a small-scale thing. We had to make a Snickers commercial, and me and my partner decided to make it Western themed, and I thought it turned out pretty great for what it is. A little bit amateur, but still, I'm glad I won. And lastly, and arguably most importantly to the channel, I got upgrades. But either way, whether or not I did or didn't make a video on this game beforehand, it has left early access, and there's certainly a lot of new things to talk about. I do think that the title for this video is a little bit disingenuous, as FURRY would suggest that the target for this game is just furries, and would also assume that there's no other draw to the game other than the characters, which simply isn't the case, as Gunfire Reborn is actually a really well-made hero/looter shooter roguelite with some long-term progression and a lot of diverse characters and playstyles that keep runs from getting a little too repetitive. And one big plus, this game is not too hardware intensive and will run on basically anything. I even got it to work on my school-issued Chromebook that was made in the 2010s that often would chug to a snail's pace if you looked at Chrome too hard. That's just how well this game is optimized, which means a lot to me since my first PC struggled to run Minecraft. Low-spec gamers matter too. Being the first game made by Chinese developers, and I apologize if I butcher this name, Douyi Games, Gunfire Reborn is a first-person roguelike with hero shooter and RPG elements, where you plow through somewhat randomly generated rooms, defeating enemies and collecting guns, scrolls, and soul essence to help permanently upgrade your character for future runs. Once you get into it, the gameplay is quite simple. You clear rooms full of enemies, pick up any loot they drop, and move on until you reach the end of a stage. The gunplay feels similar to Borderlands, where almost no weapons are hit scan, and headshots are not just rewarded, but so much more damage that it often feels required. But thanks to the generous head-to-body ratio that most enemies seem to sport, it's quite easy to land these shots, especially at the beginning of runs where you don't have a whole lot of upgrades or special weapons to carve your playstyle out of, so having those easy headshots certainly make the beginning of each run easier. This game runs on a 2-weapon loadout. Plus, at all times, you have a permanent backup, the Foundry, which is a 9-shot revolver that does decent damage that scales as you progress. It has an unlimited ammo pool, and it does pretty respectable damage and has a good fire rate. It makes for a pretty good last resort if it ever comes to that, which it probably won't. Other games like Enter the Gungeon kinda discourage you from using any weapons you pick up because of how much harder it is to come by ammo pickups, which can funnel players into using their starting weapons too often, which bogs down the experience and just makes it harder on themselves. Here, there are 3 central ammo types that all guns will fall under. Ammo drops are so often that it'll rarely become an issue. There are also elemental effects which can greatly boost your damage. Shock beats shield, corrosion beats armor, fire melts health. Nothing groundbreaking or massively innovative, all the way up until you start mixing them to get combo effects. I mean, I don't, because personally I'd rather have multiple explosives than deal with things like, thinking. But if you want to play strategically, then that option is always there. Weapons also come with randomized modifiers called inscriptions, which mostly affect the numbers and stats of each gun. However, these do create a very noticeable difference between the same weapons. They make such an impact that the right inscription on the right gun can be downright busted to play with, and different guns will synergize differently depending on what character you're playing as or what build you've decided to go with. At the end of each level, there's a chest containing an extension scroll. These usually allow you to pick what aspect of the character you want to spec into for the run. These can get out of hand pretty quickly though. While there are of course those that are borderline pointless, being so specific that you'll have to go out of your way to make any use of them, On the other side, there are those that are downright busted under the right circumstances. Hail of Bullets. Remember this, I'm gonna get into it in a bit. Each character has 3 trees that their perks can fall under, most being upgradable 3 times. There are currently 6 characters, with few more on the way it seems. I don't know how to pronounce their names, so I'll simplify them to Poison Cat, Boondog, Kickbird, Sword Bunny, and Turtle. There's also this Angry Leopard, but I often forget about this one. All of these can range from completely pointless to playable to literally the only thing you'll ever need, but my own bias aside, all are effective in their own ways and have multiple viable builds to experiment with. Quinn Yan, the bird, is my personal favorite of all the characters. He's the only character who uses armor instead of a shield, which means that he won't get the passive regeneration that others do. Instead, his armor essentially acts as a second health bar, which can be restored by using cleave or leap, which allows you to lunge forward and kick the moment that you hit the ground. If you choose the right specs, then you can pretty much become invincible since it'll give your armor back. And if you decide to focus on making the cooldown as short as possible, it's pretty hard to legitimately die with him. Even though he's my personal favorite, his kit can feel pretty much useless against some bosses, since it's really hard to get within melee distance of them. But the real reason why he is straight up my favorite character is he has access to Hail of Bullets. This is one of the examples of power snowballing out of control. This ascension makes the first few bullets of each magazine free and consume no ammo, along with extra damage and increased lucky shot, this game's version of a random crit. Now, this on paper doesn't seem too important, and it really doesn't matter depending on what weapon you're using. However, those free shots include a literal rocket launcher. The Tiger Cannon is this game's version of a single-shot, high-damage explosive with a long reload time. You've played video games, this isn't unfamiliar to you. However, this ascension completely negates the one singular limiting factor to this weapon. Plus, it makes the weapon deal more damage and gives you an even higher chance to do a random critical hit. This is certainly the most brain-dead strat I've ever seen, and I'll never pass up the opportunity to abuse it. This is just one of the many busted methods of destruction that this game allows. At the start of each run, you start with the 9-shot revolver, which gets the job done quite nicely, but it'll feel incredibly slow until you actually get a second weapon. There is, however, an upgrade that you can get that lets you pick one of 3 randomly selected weapons at the starting room, so it's nice, but before you get it, the game can feel pretty slow at the start. And speaking of slow, why does it feel like you move at a snail's pace all the time? You do have a dash, but the cooldown feels way too long, and when you're in the heat of things, it can be a problem. There are some buffs that you can get to lower the cooldown or make it stack a few times, but without these, the game just feels like it moves very slowly. It's part of the reason why the bird is my favorite character. His leap is just another way to move around faster, which is something that I personally feel the game is unplayable without. Granted, the enemies are designed with this slow speed in mind, and it's not like it's unfair. It's just kind of boring sometimes. However, this is ultimately up to the person who's playing. I like games like Titanfall and Doom, which are all much faster paced, and I'm not gonna lie, this is much less of an issue when there are more powerful and more plentiful enemies around you. Gunfire Reborn has 3 levels with around 5 stages each, and an optional 4th level at the end. The level designs are nice, but a little bit repetitive. I often find myself seeing the same rooms in the same run, but the enemy layouts are varied enough to where this can be a non-issue. Since this game is a roguelike, the areas are somewhat procedurally generated. More something along the lines of just moving into random assortments of pre-made rooms, which is pretty common in the genre. My only issue with this is how the first and second levels blend together so much. The first is a stone temple. There's very little to the environment, both mechanically and visually, so it feels pretty dull, and the same thing applies to the second level, the desert. But it's to a little bit lesser of an extent. The environment is boring, but the enemies are harder and they certainly spice things up. The third level, however, is pretty nice. I have very little to say about it though. It's challenging and visually pleasing. It's a mix of cave, docks, and village areas. There is an optional 4th area once you beat the game's first main boss. It's a snowy mountain, which I actually enjoy a lot. However, this is the home to the only truly annoying enemy in the game, the flying saucers, that heals and shields enemies. This is the worst, especially since my preferred loadout is 2 slow-moving explosives on a character who's mostly focused on melee. It's not particularly hard to take it down, it's just time-consuming and kind of annoying. As you progress, you'll find glowing cracks in the walls. These are vaults, optimal challenge areas that can vary from a mini-boss to parkour challenges, or just more enemies with some special condition or modifier. These will always reward the player with a scroll of some kind. Don't worry, in multiplayer, the loot isn't shared if you don't want it to be, so no one can go and yoink some weapon that you've been wanting to get. Multiplayer-wise, I haven't touched it too much. I've had a decent time with it, but I've mostly been playing solo. And I think that the game is more fun with buddies, but it's still very much enjoyable if you want to run it alone. The difficulty scales with the player count, so you're not at a disadvantage if you want to do it by yourself. I do thoroughly enjoy this game. It's a fun little shooter that can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. Even though I've played little multiplayer, I still found that what I did play was quite fun. However, there is this one little problem that absolutely kills the game's momentum though. It crashes. I couldn't find a cause or a reason for it. It just does. It doesn't happen often enough to be considered like a game-breaking problem, but it does seem to happen the moment that you forget that it can happen, which is a little bit frustrating. Overall though, for the first game made by this developer, Gunfire Reborn is actually a pretty good time and is certainly worth the relatively small price tag. So yeah, that's Gunfire Reborn. I certainly hope this video was better than my first one, but I'm glad to be back doing this. Special thanks to FURRY for redoing the stills and is now going to be a reoccurring artist on the channel. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching. If you liked the video, then like it. If you disliked the video, then dislike it. And if you want to see more stuff by me, then I would recommend hitting the subscribe button. But with all that out of the way, I will see you all on the next video.